Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, the honorable judges and the audiences. Here I am, Tabitha, Afifah, Febianisa, and now I would proudly deliver my speech. Ladies and gentlemen, imagine that your community's life have reigned for the sake of developing economies. Imagine that your dignity and identity are stolen by those who promise you welfare, human rights, and many other great things. Just by imagining it, our feeling might be hurt. It isn't that nice to be betrayed by our own government just for the sake of economic growth, is it? Yeah, that is what indigenous people have been through. Ladies and gentlemen, do you know indigenous people worldwide number between 300 to 500 million, embody and nurture 80% of the world's cultural and biological diversity, and occupy 20% of world's land surface. They are significantly owners and users of the land and resource. Their traditional knowledge is rooted in kinship with a strong connection with the land and nature. Indigenous people are involved in improving natural resource management, develop innovation in food production and harvesting, and own competitive businesses in areas such as mining, tourism, and arts and creative industries. Beyond this all achievement and contribution, they make a significant effect to the world's cultural and linguistic diversity. Indigenous people are key to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. Those are such amazing achievement of indigenous people, right? Maybe now you are wondering, then why we have to protect them? It looks like they are already protected. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is just how it looks, not how the facts that are going through. Ladies and gentlemen, despite progress to protect their rights, many of the world's 370 million indigenous peoples face discrimination and threats of their livelihoods and ancestral lands. European settlements, for example, severely shrunk and permanently altered to the land and resource available for indigenous people to sustain their sustainable economies. Dependency relationship with the state and institution further resulted in indigenous economics activity being determined within a framework set by non-indigenous people. As a result, the capacity for indigenous people to set their own development pathway was diminished, negatively affecting their well-being, language, and culture. Their right to development has been largely denied by colonial and modern state in the pursuit of economic growth. As a consequence, indigenous peoples often lose out to more powerful actors, becoming among the most impoverished groups in their countries. Conquest and colonization have attempted to steal their dignity and identity as indigenous people, as well as the fundamental right of self-determination. Ladies and gentlemen, we might say the indigenous people's rights under international law have evolved from existing international law, including human rights treaties, to address the specific circumstances facing indigenous people as well as their priorities, such as rights to their lands, territories, and resources, and self-determination. But unfortunately, many indigenous people continue to face a range of human rights issues. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, the implementation of their indigenous people's rights is far away from perfect. Some of the most difficult human rights challenge for indigenous people stem from pressure on their lands, territories, and resources as a result of activities associated with development and extraction of resources. Their cultures continue to be threatened, and the protection and promotion of their rights resisted. Ladies and gentlemen, the root of problem would be the interference, their way of living by states' disrespect to their right, as well as the invasion of traditional lands by multinational corporations and small businesses for exploitation of natural resource, while each of their indigenous culture is rich of religious and belief system, way of life, sustenance, and arts. Why they don't just get benefit from that such things rather than exploit their land, their territories, and resource? The government indirectly justified exploitation to indigenous people or communities as a necessary means for the sake of economic growth. Exploitation someone means taking unfair advantage of them. It is to use another person's vulnerability for one's own benefit. The exploitation that indigenous people experience is a structural exploitation, which means a property of institution or a system which is the rules of the game unfairly benefit one group of people to the detriment of another. Due to the close relationship between indigenous peoples' cultural and economic situation and their environmental settings, indigenous rights issues are linked with the concerns over environmental change and sustainable development. Indigenous people are essential for solving the problem of reducing carbon emission and many other climate change effects, like global warming, for example, and approaching the threat on both cultural and biological diversity in general. That is because of the life of indigenous people embody and nurture 80% of the world's cultural and biological diversity, as what I have mentioned before. It means by protecting their right, we can automatically help the sustainable development without exploit them. Ladies and gentlemen, so instead of exploit the indigenous people, communities, by taking everything that they supposed to own, such as rights of their lands, territories, resource, and self-determination, we can work together with them as a group, as a teamwork, to develop economies as one. For example, their unique culture can be an attractiveness for tourism. Government can get that instead of exploit them. Their traditional knowledge also, that rooted in kinship with strong connection to land and nature, can help us to slowly reduce the climate change impact that can slowly affecting the economic growth itself. So now, what are you waiting for? Let's protect the indigenous people's right from exploitation, because both indigenous and economic are the same important. Protecting the indigenous people's right means protecting human rights. Okay, that's all from me. Thanks for your attention. See you and goodbye. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.